I say. जैसे सफरी करम ना सफरी ना करम yeah Andrei ta hay nói lắm rồi ha Muy tarde, las mañanas van a estar ahí, ahora volvió. Aquí está el culo. Está para más de tu cabo. Ya ya. Nem achei tudo diretor. क्या करे कोई इसने लड़का के दरद है माई बाप के भी दरद है ये तो सब कोई के Material out little hot cake Cây bây giờ cái ô पिल्लवा क्या सुरेश कहाँ क्वार्ट में आएगा एक क्वार्ट और 11 बजे सुरेश यार सब कोई लेना करवा गई था ये सुरेश भाई है तो प्रेम भी लास्ट तक ढेर करे था
won't go all the way to 1965, of course. We won't go all the way to 1965, but we'll cover until Prabhupada receives special mercy. Okay, so let's start. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana-Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Caitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupkadamahim Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamlam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Tams Jivam Satvaitam Savadutam Vijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtai Bhutale Srimate Jayapataka Swamiti Namine Nama Acharya Padaya Nitai Kripa Padayane Gaurakatha Dhamudaya Nagaragravitarine Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Gopi Pranadase Namane. Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nivisheshunyavadi Pashyatya Deshatarine. Vancha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripasindhuvevacha Kritanam Bhavadebhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girimit kritam desha gurudhara namit kripatamaham bande paramananda madham Shri Caitanya Ishwaram. Katanchana smrite yasmin dushkaram sukaram bhave smrite vipritam syad Shri Caitanyam namamitam. Rudolfi, where is this? Okay. 1 minute. Share screen. Okay. Which one?
Yeah, just share.
Which one?
It's already selected. Press share.
Already selected?
Yeah.
Where?
Minimize this.
Minimize it. Okay.
And then just tab. Yes.
Is it visible now? Just check.
Yeah.
Visible? Okay. Those of you who are familiar with Indian history would know that 1947 was the year of Indian independence, and also it was the partition of India into India and Pakistan. Although Satsuru Maharaj has given us various details in the book, I wouldn't get into the details of it because they're not really relevant for our study of Prabhupada's Leelamrita. So I'm just keeping some pointers so that we focus on what Prabhupada did. I mean, some little bit of history is good, but then there are so many elements, so many details, so it's just unnecessary to get into that for a study course. For reading, it's good. Okay, so partition tore India, leaving 5 million Sikhs and Hindus in Pakistan and as many Muslims in India, and the great migration began. Meaning those in Pakistan, the Sikhs and Hindus, they had to move to India, and the Muslims started moving from India to Pakistan. Refugees fleeing from Pakistan to India and from India to Pakistan clashed with each other and even with their own countrymen of the opposing faith, and the violence that erupted claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Srila Prabhupada, our independence movement was started by Mahatma Gandhi ji for uniting all the different sections of the people. But actually, the result was that instead of being united, India was partitioned. The partition became so poisonous that formerly there was only sporadic Hindu-Muslim riots in some places. But now there was organized fighting between Pakistan and Hindustan. So actually we were not being united. We were being separated. The Hindus would go to the mosque of the Muslim and break it. And the Muslim would go to the temples of the Hindus and break the idol. And they will think, we have finished the Hindus' God. Just like the Hindus also think, oh, we have broken their God. They are all ignorant. God cannot be Hindu. God cannot be Muslim. God cannot be Christian. God is God. We have seen in 1947, Hindu-Muslim fighting. One party was Hindu, the other party was Muslim. They fought and so many died. And after death, there was no distinction who was Hindu or who was Muslim. The municipal men gathered them together in piles to throw them somewhere. They fought, and in Bhag Bazaar, there were heaps of dead bodies. And when it is a dead body, no one could understand who was Hindu and who was Muslim. Simply, it was to be cleared from the road. So, the very concept for which they had fought, Hindu or Muslim, completely disintegrated when they died. They could not even be distinguished who is Hindu, who is Muslim, and just a pile of garbage, just like they cleared garbage from the road. They just cleared the bodies like clearing garbage. Now, this is the effect of listening to blind leaders. Prabhupada would often say that our human life becomes reduced to nothing more significant than pieces of garbage. I mean, this whole body becomes like a piece of garbage. And similarly, other bodies also become pieces of garbage by not listening to a proper leader, proper spiritual leader. If it becomes a blind leading the blind, then this is the result, that life is turned into a pile of garbage. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had said in this connection, persons who are strongly entrapped with the consciousness of enjoying material life and who have therefore accepted as their leader or guru a similar blind man attached to external sense objects, cannot understand that the goal of life is to return home back to Godhead and engage in the service of Lord Vishnu. As blind men guided by another blind man miss the right path and fall into a ditch, materially attached men led by another materially attached man are bound by the ropes of fruitive labor, which are made of very strong cords, and they continue again and again in materialistic life, suffering the threefold miseries. So material nature is ruthless, So that is the point that is being made here, that no matter how lofty an ideology is about nationalism or whatever it may be, or Hindu, Muslim, these religious identities, no matter how strong or lofty they may seem, but they're all ultimately a piece of garbage, because there is no real spiritual enlightenment. And that is shown in the time of partition, where they could not even understand who was Hindu or Muslim. They simply cleared the bodies from the road as if they were a pile of garbage. Okay. So now that Prabhupada could not publish back to Godhead, Prabhupada was a relentless preacher. He was a relentless preacher. So then he started taking to corresponding individually with people, with prominent people, or whenever there would be an opportunity which arose, which he thought could be converted into an opportunity to preach Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada went ahead and did that. So then the next phase was the phase of preaching through letters. After publishing back to God, the next phase was preaching through letters. Okay. A well-known reformer, Maharaj Pratap Raja, was forming what he called the World Federation. Abhay had read a news sheet which Mr. Pratap had published from Vrindavan, in which he addressed all nations and peoples of the world and called for a unity of mankind. Abhay wrote to him suggesting that Lord Krishna's teachings in Bhagavad-Gita provided a theistic science capable of uniting all religions. Now, this is a very interesting theme that comes across in Prabhupada's teachings. He repeatedly calls Krishna consciousness a science. He says, he refers to it as a science. And Prabhupada also, even in those early days, he would refer to Krishna consciousness as theistic science. So, why is that expression science coming into the picture? Is it justified, or is it just, okay, Prabhupada is using some poetic license to use the expression science? No, it is factual, because if we look at the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, Rajavidya Rajaguhyam Susukam Kartumayam Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam. Now, it's very important for us to note that when Krishna says about Rajavidya Rajaguhya, this is the king of all knowledge. Okay, and then he says it is very joyfully performed. Then he uses the expression called Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam. Pratyaksha. Now, this is the scientific method. Pratyaksha. Pratyaksha means they have to directly perceive it. They have to directly experience. It's all a process of direct perception. So, Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam, Krishna says. Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam means that which is directly perceived. Dharma, which is directly perceived. Pratyakshavagamam Dharmya. Because Dharma normally has the understanding you do so. Not normally, generally people have the understanding you do some Dharma. As a result of it, you will get something credit. Not just in this life, but sometimes in future life and all that. That's correct. That's generally the concept of Dharma. However, the Dharma of Sanatana Dharma, the Rajavidya that Krishna is talking about, Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam, it brings up, it can be directly perceived not just in the future life, but instantly. It's Pratyakshavagamam, it's Pratyaksha. The very practice itself is Pratyaksha. The very practice itself is Pratyaksha. Not that the result becomes Pratyaksha at some point in time. Susukam Kartum means very happily performed. Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam. It is Pratyaksha. The Dharma becomes Pratyaksha. So, Prabhupada had this firm understanding that Bhagavad-Gita is presenting a theistic science which is capable of uniting all religions. When he says king of knowledge, which means that it is applicable for everyone. It is not just applicable for a particular class of people. It is meant for all kinds of people. It's the king of all knowledge. You have to mute, I think. Mr. Pratap replied in May of 1947, I admire your deep study of Srimad Bhagavad-Gita. I myself am a great admirer of the great classic. I assure you that I'm working strictly according to the book. Mr. Pratap mentioned his book, The Religion of Love, and suggested that Abhay read it if he wanted to know the World Federation's view of religion. In the meanwhile, Mr. Pratap wrote, I do not agree to your suggestion of making the name of Krishna or Govinda as the basis of the unity of religions. This would amount to conversion and won't lead to unity of religions. I highly appreciate your efforts in the direction of back to Godhead. Abhay got it, read it, and July of 1947, while he was visiting Kanpur, wrote a reply. He had traveled to Kanpur not as a spiritual teacher, but as a pharmaceutical salesman. Yet a typewriter had been available and out had come his preaching. So Prabhupada's writing. In continuation of my last postcard, I beg to inform you that I have finished the reading of your book, Religion of Love. In my opinion, the whole thesis is based on the philosophy of pantheism. And the pantheism means to consider everyone to be like God. That's the whole, every object, animate or inanimate, to be as good as God. That's called pantheism. In a simple way, that's what the pantheism is. Or the philosophy of pantheism and the approaches made by the services of mankind. Religion of love is the true religious idea. But if the approach is made through service of mankind only, then the process is made imperfect, partial, and unscientific. Why is it imperfect? Because all human beings are imperfect, and not only are all human beings imperfect, the whole of human being cannot, by serving the whole of humankind, you cannot serve the whole of creation. So that's why it's called imperfect. Partial because only addressing the human beings. And we're addressing the human beings. What about the animals? What about the birds? What about all the other living entities? Unscientific. Why is it unscientific? Because just like you if you want to water the root of a, if you want to water a tree, to water the root, it's unscientific to go and water the leaves or the branch. So Prabhupada is very specific in this expressions that he used. Very nicely he explains it. And the interesting thing is that if you notice, Prabhupada is very consistent, right from day one till he physically disappeared from our planet. He's very consistent. Anything short of pure devotional service, the philosophy of pure devotional service, Prabhupada would not accept. That's all. As simple as that. Anything short of it, nothing doing. He would not accept it. Okay. The true religion of love is perfectly, Prabhupada continues, the true religion of love is perfectly inculcated in the Bhagavad-Gita. Besides, you have not quoted any authority for all your statements. So it is more or less dogmatic. If different men put different dogmatic views about religion and its essentials, who is to be accepted and who is not to be? Therefore, the upright shall be and must be authoritative, scientific, and universal. Abhay then gave a summary of the Bhagavad-Gita in 10 points, concluding, the highest service that can be rendered to mankind is, therefore, to preach the philosophy and religion of Bhagavad-Gita for all time, all places, and all people. This is one of those rare things where someone actually responded to him, but normally people would not easily respond. So Sacharupa writes, but extended philosophical dialogue was not usually the result of his letters. In 1947, when Abhay wrote to high government officers of the newly formed government of India, suggesting a remedy for riots, Hindu-Muslim riots that is, they turned him away. When he asked to talk with the governor of West Bengal, the governor's secretary replied, His Excellency regrets that he is unable to grant you an interview at present, owing to heavy pressure of work. When he wrote to the assistant secretary to the Minister of Education, an assistant to the assistant secretary replied, the government of India regret that they are unable to accede to your request. Sometimes official interest took the form of a patronizing pat on the head. I'm sure your scheme for establishing peace will meet with response from our Prime Minister. That's all. And another, he, the Minister of Education, is glad to see you're taking to root out communalism. He suggests that you get in touch with so and so. A local official wrote, who asked not to be seen, I thank you for all that you have written and the fine sentiments which you have expressed. It is no use arguing the matter, as I do not think that I can serve any useful purpose by joining the organization which you wish to set up. And therefore, you need not take the trouble of seeing me. I wish you, however, all success. This is politely, so-called polite, completely refusing to help Prabhupada. So, in October, after the Calcutta riots of 1947, India got independence on the 15th of August, 1947. So, it is around that, just before that and after that, the riots were happening. The peak riots were happening at that time. In October, so this is a few months, September, just 2 months after the independence and partition started. In October, after the Calcutta riots of 1947, Abhay wrote to the chairman of the Rehabilitation Committee, who replied, regarding Hari Kirtan and Prasadam, look at Prabhupada's formula, it's Hari Kirtan and Prasadam. Look, regarding Hari Kirtan and Prasadam, you may make any program of your own, but I am afraid I am not interested in the same, nor my committee, and therefore there is no necessity of your meeting with me. Abhay was fulfilling his role as a Vaishnava preacher, and the secretaries of the various government offices were recognizing and addressing him as such. But they could not appreciate his applications of the philosophy of Bhagavad-Gita and his suggestions for Hari Kirtan. Occasionally, however, someone seemed interested. Mr. N.P. Asthana, High Court advocate, replied, he left his body in 1968, Mr. Astan. I am very much obliged to you for your letter regarding your broad scheme about spiritual improvement. I thoroughly appreciate the fine feelings which have prompted you to write this letter and the kindness with which you have considered my query. I have been a student of Bhagavad-Gita and have also imbibed some of its teachings, but I still lack a good deal and will be glad to be guided by a person of your accomplishment. You may kindly, therefore, send your scheme to me on receipt. I will be able to express my views. Okay. So that was what we notice here is that Prabhupada, it's not that he gets discouraged. Prabhupada will always say he never got discouraged in trying to serve the mission of a spiritual master. Never got discouraged in trying to serve the mission of a spiritual master. He was constantly enthused in trying to establish his Guru Maharaj's mission. So even if one after the other, people are not so interested in meeting him, sometimes, rarely somebody would express interest, but Prabhupada was undeterred in his determination. He continued to push forward what he wanted in terms of trying to establish his spiritual master's mission. Then the famous episode of Prabhupada's letter to Mahatma Gandhi comes up. Now, this is Prabhupada, we know that was a follower of Gandhi before he met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And Gandhi is considered as the father of the Indian nation. He is credited with gaining India's independence. Although Prabhupada personally and a lot of others in India think that the Subhash Chandra Bose who was primarily responsible. But nevertheless, Gandhi had a significant role, and that's definitely accepted by everyone. So it's only a question of to what degree. There's a varying opinion on to what degree, but everybody accepts that Mahatma Gandhi did have a central role in the Indian independence struggle. Okay. Now, this is a very interesting letter, extremely interesting letter. We need to follow this very carefully. Letter to Mahatma Gandhi. Dear friend Mahatma Ji. Now look at this. It's not that Prabhupada, although he holds very strong views, that only someone who Mahatma means Devi Prakriti Ashrita. One who's taken shelter of the Devi Prakriti, Yoga Maya, is the only person who's fit to be considered as a Mahatma. Nevertheless, look at this. Prabhupada is maintaining a social etiquette because he was referred to as Mahatma. Prabhupada is also referring to him as dear friend Mahatma Ji. He's not saying like how Prahlad Maharaj addresses his father, oh, best among the demons. He's not saying that. He's not saying, oh, the so-called Mahatma. He's not saying that. Dear friend Mahatma Ji. He's just following the social custom. But notice the message. Message is very, he doesn't follow any social custom. He just goes straight for the truth. Please accept my respectful namaskar. I am your unknown friend. In fact, this whole chapter is called Unknown Friend, an unknown friend. Okay? Please accept my respectful namaskar. I am your unknown friend, but I had to write to you at times and again, although you never cared to reply them. I sent you my papers back to Godhead, but your secretaries told me that you have very little time to read the letters and much less for reading the magazines. I asked for an interview with you, but your busy secretaries never cared to reply this. Anyway, as I am your very old friend, although unknown to you, I am writing to you in order to bring you to the rightful position deserved by you. As a sincere friend, I must not deviate from my duty toward a friend like your good self. I tell you as a sincere friend that you must immediately retire from active politics if you do not desire to die an inglorious death. You have 125 years to live as you have desired to live, but if you die an inglorious death, it is no worth. The honor and prestige that you have obtained during the course of your present lifetime were not possible to be obtained by anyone else within the living memory. But you must know that all these honors and prestiges were false in as much as they were created by the illusory energy of Godhead. Now, Prabhupada is talking about the honor and prestige that Mahatma Gandhi had, and he's trying to say, you should understand that this honors and prestiges are false, in as much as they were created by the illusory energy of Godhead called the Maya. By this falsity, I do not mean to say that your so many friends were false to you, nor were you false to them. By this falsity, I mean illusion, or in other words, the false friendship and honors obtained thereby were but creation of Maya, and therefore they are always temporary or false, as you may call it. But none of you, neither your friends nor yourself, know this truth. A sadhu, okay. So this is Prabhupada's letter, and Satsvarup Maharaj provides very insightful observation to this. A sadhu is not supposed to flatter, but to cut. The very word sadhu means one who cuts. That's the definition of the word sadhu. A sadhu is not supposed to flatter, but to cut. This is the basis of his friendship, that he cuts away the illusion of the materialistic person. Mahatma Gandhi, forsaken by his friends, bitterly disappointed the outcome of the long, hard struggle for Indian independence, and apprehensive about the future, had been reduced to a position in which he might be able to realize that his friends and work were ultimately illusory. Thus, it was the perfect time for him to comprehend Abai's message. After so many years of India struggling for Indian independence, when finally the independence came, the partition happened. So it became very, very chaotic. So it was something which hardly anybody had any control over what was going on, what could be done also. So that is why he's saying that Gandhi is bitterly disappointed because of long, hard struggle for Indian independence. Finally, what is the result? Bitter partition. Prabhupada continues. After Satsvarup Maharaj's observation, we continue with the letter. Now, by the grace of God, that illusion is going to be cleared, and thus your faithful friends like Acharya Kripalani and others are accusing you for your inability at the present moment to give them any practical program of work as you happen to give them during your glorious days of non-cooperation movement. So you are also in a plight to find out a proper solution for the present political tangle created by your opponents. You should therefore take a note of warning from your insignificant friend like me that unless you retire timely from politics and engage yourself 10% in the preaching work of Bhagavad-Gita, which is the real function of the Mahatmas, you shall have to meet with such inglorious deaths as Mussolini, Hitler, or Lloyd George met with. Now, Prabhupada is very, very specific, and he's the classic definition of a sadhu, one who distinguishes illusion from reality and one who cuts through the knots of illusion with that reality. So Prabhupada is presenting reality as it is. For years, Abai had wanted to approach Mahatma Gandhi with this message. In fact, he had written before, although it had been of no avail. But now he was convinced that unless Gandhi got out of politics, he would soon die an inglorious death. that Gandhiji was remaining active in politics rather than preaching devotional service put him in need of a warning. Abhay was writing to save a friend. He continues, Prabhupada continues. You can easily understand as to how some of your political enemies in the garb of friends, both Indian and English, have deliberately cheated you and have broken your heart by doing the same mischief for which you have struggled so hard for so many years. You wanted chiefly Hindu-Muslim unity in India, and they have tactfully managed to undo your work by the creation of Pakistan and India separately. You want freedom for India, but they're given permanent dependence of India. You want to do something for the upliftment of the position of the Bungis. Bungis are the street sweepers. You want to do something for the upliftment of the position of the Bungis, but they're still rotting as Bungis, even though you're living in the Bungi colony. They're all therefore illusions. And when these things will be presented to you as they are, you must consider them as God sent. God has favored you by dissipating the illusion you are hovering in. And by the same illusion, you are nursing those ideas as truth. I mean, look at the clarity, look at the how focused Prabhupada is. Basically, anybody who is not surrendered to Krishna is a servant of Maya. You know, even though they may think that they're trying to pursue the truth, as with the case of Mahatma Gandhi, he was under the impression that he was pursuing the truth. But Prabhupada is very clearly explaining it to him here that God has favored you by dissipating the illusion you are hovering in. And by the same illusion, you are nursing those ideas as truth. You know, so truth has this potency to cover illusion and make it appear as if it's the truth. That's why there is the two potencies of Maya, the covering potency, the throwing potency, and the covering potency. So Maya throws us into material nature, and initially, like for example, in our lives also, sometimes we are thrown into situations where we don't like, but then what happens? We get used to that situation. Then after some time, it doesn't bother us really as it bothered us when we initially came into contact with that situation. A classical example was King Indra was cursed to become a pig. And finally, when he was offered the opportunity to go back to the heavenly kingdom, he said, oh, what shall I do? I have my piglets and my sheep pig and all these. I mean, I have my whole family. The idea is that initially when the king of heaven gets thrown into becoming a pig, it is like a big shock. But then one gets used to one situation. So he became used to the life of a hog. And so much so that when it was time for him to leave and go back, he was not willing. He said, oh, I have my hog family, my piglets and others, and sheep pig, and I've got my society of pigs and all that. So like that, all this nationalism and all this, it may all look very bombastic. It will all look very bombastic, but it's all illusions. It's all illusions. It's due to the covering potency of Maya that they appear very attractive, or they even appear noble. There's nothing noble in nationalism. It is just animal consciousness. As Prabhupada would often say, sometimes he would go on his morning walk and there would be big dogs coming and barking at him. And Prabhupada would look at the dogs and say, immigration department, because Prabhupada just didn't like the immigration department when he would travel, because they would give him trouble to enter into the country that he was traveling to. So that because generally the dogs are territory conscious. So people, if we develop the same kind of territory consciousness we are this country, we belong to this country, and all this kind of consciousness, then we are no better than dogs. It may appear lofty nationalism, but it's just a pursuit of illusion. Abhay dutifully attempted to inform Abhay dutifully attempted to inform Gandhi that there is nothing absolute within this relative world. Ahimsa or non-violence must always be followed by violence, just as light is followed by darkness. Nothing is absolute truth in the dual world. You did not know this, wrote Abhay. Neither you ever care to know this from the right sources, and therefore all your attempts to create unity were followed by disunity, and ahimsa was followed by himsa. Abhay pointed out that Gandhi had never undergone the standard practice for spiritual advancement, namely accepting a bona fide spiritual master. Although Bhagavad-Gita declares the necessity of accepting a guru in disciplic succession, Gandhi was well known for listening to his inner voice and for extracting ideas from various writers like Ruskin and Thoreau and mixing them with the teachings from the New Testament and the Gita. Had Gandhi approached a guru, said Abhay, he would not have become bewildered within the sphere of relative truth. Now, this thing about listening to inner voice is something which is very popular. A lot of people speak about listening to the inner voice. So once one devotee asked this question, listening to the inner voice, is the inner voice the voice of the Paramatma? No, it is not the voice of the Paramatma. It is the voice of conditioning. Because let's take, for example, someone who's raised in a family of non-vegetarians. So they are used to eating meat. So when they eat meat, the child, or even when they're grown up, or whatever, when they eat meat, they don't feel guilty. I'm talking generally. There may be some families which are exceptions. But generally, when you grow up in a family like that, the meat-eating family, meat eating becomes acceptable. But whereas suppose someone is brought up in a Brahminical family, even if the thought of, even the sight of meat will repel them. So if we say the voice of the inner voice is Paramatma, what does it mean? Does it mean that the Paramatma is telling for that meat eater, because he doesn't feel anything while eating meat, he feels perfectly fine. His inner voice is aligned with the eating of meat, whereas the inner voice of vegetarian is not aligned with the eating of meat. So how can it be? Both cannot be Paramatma, right? So basically, this inner voice is the voice of conditioning. It is not the voice of Paramatma. The voice of Paramatma is the voice of the spiritual master and the voice of scripture, as Prabhupada is mentioning in the scripture. These are not what suddenly one feels and things like that. Okay. In the Katha Upanishad, it is ordered that one must approach the bona fide guru who is not only well versed in all the scriptures of the world, but is also the realized soul in Brahman, the absolute, in order to learn the absolute truth. Now, this is a very important thing, because sometimes we hear devotees saying, okay, the qualification to become a guru is that one should just study Bhakti-Vedanta. You have this kind of understanding. Yes, that is necessary, but it is not sufficient. It's a necessary condition that one should at least have studied until Bhakti-Vedanta. But it's necessary, but not a sufficient condition. What is necessary and sufficient is, that they need to read scripture. Scripture for us means reading the books of Srila Prabhupada. And not only they need to read them, but also there has to be realization. This is what Prabhupada is talking about. This is what the Katha Upanishad is speaking about here. In the Katha Upanishad, there is ordered that one must approach the bona fide guru who is not only well versed in all the scriptures of the world, but is also realized soul in Brahman, the absolute, in order to learn the science of the absolute truth, which means he has Swarupa Siddhi, who has attained this perfectional stage of realizing his constitutional position. So also it is instructed in the Bhagavad-Gita as follows: Tad viddhi pranipatena pariprashnena sebaya upadeksyanti te jnanam jnanina tattvadarshinaha. Chapter 4, text 34. But I know that you never underwent, Prabhupada is continuing. But I know that you never underwent such transcendental teaching, except some severe penances which you have invented for your purpose, as you have invented so many things in the course of experimenting with the relative truths. You might have easily avoided them if you had approached the Guru as above mentioned. Then, recognizing Mahatma Gandhi's godly qualities and austerities, Abhay requested him to employ his moral elevation for surrendering to the absolute truth. Abhay urged him to get out of politics immediately. By your sincere efforts to attain some godly qualities, by Prabhupada's writing to Gandhi again, this is a continuation. By your sincere efforts to attain some godly qualities, by austerities, etc., surely have raised you to some higher platform which you can better utilize for the purpose of the absolute truth. If, however, remain satisfied with such temporary position only, and do not try to know the absolute truth, then you are, if, however, you remain satisfied with such temporary position only, and do not try to know the absolute truth, then surely you are to fall down with the artificially exalted position under the laws of nature. So if you want really to approach the absolute truth and want to do some real good to the people in general all over the world, which shall include your ideas of unity, peace, and non-violence, then you must give up the rotten politics immediately and rise up for the preaching work of the philosophy and religion of Bhagavad-Gita without offering unnecessary and dogmatic interpretations on them. I had occasionally discussed the subject in my paper, Back to Godhead, and a leaf from the same is enclosed herewith for your reference. I would only request you to retire from politics at least for a month only. So Prabhupada is making a very minimum tangible prescription. I would only request you to retire from politics at least for a month only. Let us have discussion on the Bhagavad-Gita. I am sure thereby that you shall get a new light from the result of such discussions, not only for your benefit, but for the benefit of the world at large, as I know that you're sincere, honest, and a moralist. Awaiting your reply, awaiting your early reply with interest. Yours sincerely, Abhay Charan De. Okay. There was no reply. A month later, Gandhi announced that he would fast until death unless India made a payment of 550 million rupees to Pakistan, a previous condition of the partition agreement. At first, Hindu refugees from Pakistan demonstrated outside Gandhi's darkened room chanting, "Let Gandhi die." But as he fasted each day closer to death, he aroused the heartfelt concern of the nation, and the government leaders repaid the money to Pakistan. The great crowds approached him, chanting, "Let Gandhi live." No, the same people who said, "Let Gandhi die," they were saying, "Let Gandhi live." Meanwhile, Hindu-Muslim violence continued. On January 30th, 1948, the day after he had drafted a new constitution for the Congress party, Gandhi took his evening meal. On January 30th, the day after he had drafted a new constitution for the Congress party, Gandhi took his evening meal, worked at his spinning wheel, then walked towards his evening prayer meeting and was shot 3 times in the chest. He died crying out the name of God, "Hey Ram." Abhai's letter of the previous month suddenly read like a prophecy, but it had not been read by the person for whom it had been intended. So this is a very interesting and engagement that, or I try to at least try to draw Gandhi into Krishna consciousness into studying the Bhagavad-Gita, but you can see how elaborately Prabhupada does it. He addresses every single point of concern. What are all the different advantages of it? What is wrong? What is right? Very nicely he does it. Now, it's not that, okay, Prabhupada wrote to Gandhi and so Gandhi left the planet. That's it. No, Prabhupada continues. Even after Gandhi leaves, Prabhupada continues. When the directors of the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial National Fund invited suggestions on how to commemorate Gandhi's life and work, Prabhupada was like, what do you call it? A Yukta Vairagi. Yukta Vairagi means he knows how to use something in Krishna's service. So Abhay wrote to them and simultaneously to Vallabhbhai Patel, India's deputy prime minister, proposing the Gandhian way to use the funds. So there is a Mahatma Gandhi Memorial National Fund, which is formed. So he proposed a Gandhian way to use the fund. What is the Gandhian way? Prabhupada explains. Gandhi's whole life was dedicated to the service of humanity at large, with special interest for raising the moral standard. His later activity showed he was equal to everyone, and all the people of the world knew him more as a spiritual leader than a mere politician. Devotion to Godhead was his ultimate aim. And when I say that a sacred memory should be perpetrated, not in the ordinary way, but in the Gandhian way, I mean that fitting respects to his memory will be done in the following manner. Satsuru Maharaj is not included the entire thing, what is done here, but just some excerpts. Abhay wrote of a Mahatma Gandhi rarely described. Prabhupada described Gandhi as a Vaishnava. Despite his pressing political activities, Gandhi had never missed his daily prayer meetings in the evenings. Even at the time of his assassination, he had been on his way to attend his daily kirtan. Abhay stressed that it was because of Gandhi's regular participation in congregational prayer that he had been strong in his work to raise the moral standard of humanity. Gandhi, minus his spiritual activities, Abhay wrote, is an ordinary politician, but actually he was a saint amongst the statesmen. Abhay wrote that it had been Lord Caitanya who had originated the congregational chanting of the names of Krishna and Rama, and his followers, the 6 Goswamis, had left a wealth of literature for discussion and understanding. The Memorial Fund Board should take this lesson from Mahatma Ji's practical life and develop it on a large scale. Therefore, one fitting memorial to Mahatma Gandhi would be to institute daily congregational readings from the Bhagavad-Gita. When people's spiritual instincts were kindled by daily prayer offerings, then they would develop the highest qualities in their character. That's number one. Number two, number one is to institute daily congregational readings from the Bhagavad-Gita. Number two, Abhay had a second suggestion. Gandhi was known for his attempts to enable the lower classes to enter the temples. And in Noakhali, he had installed the deity of Radha and Krishna for the ordinary man to worship. Although this is generally taken as a side issue of Gandhi's work, Abhay took it as the essence that Gandhi was a theistic movement. Abhay explained that although there were hundreds and thousands of temples in India, they were not being properly managed, and therefore educated citizens were neglecting them. In the original Vedic culture, the purpose of the temples had been to nurture spiritual culture. If the temples of India could be reorganized as vital spiritual centers, then the disturbed minds of the day could be trained for life's higher duties. Such education and practice, Abhay wrote, can help man realizing the existence of God, without whose sanction, according to Mahatma Gandhi, not a blade of grass moves. He also referred to Gandhi's Harijan movement, which most people saw as Gandhi's humanitarian effort to grant equal rights to untouchables, whom Gandhi had recognized as Harijan, the people of God, because they're rejected by everyone. They are not rejected by Hari. So he called them Harijan, the people of God. Abai stressed that this was also essentially spiritual aspect of Gandhi's life. But rather than simply rubber stamping an untouchable as Harijan, Abai argued there must be a systematic program for elevating people of the lower classes. So not just rubber stamp them and call them Harijan, but actually have a systematic program to upgrade them. But rather than simply rubber stamping an untouchable Harijan, Abai argued there must be a systematic program for elevating people of the lower classes. This program was taught in the Bhagavad-Gita and could best be applied under the guidance of a bona fide devotee of the Lord. Abai volunteered to take up this work on behalf of the memorial board. If the board is in attempting to commemorate Gandhi's efforts and accomplishments, neglected the essential spiritual aspects of Gandhi's life, Abai warned his memory will soon be dead, as has been the lot of other politicians. Perhaps they saw Abai as another opportunist seeking money or as a sectarian religionist. But now, one second. Is it? Where?
Last paragraph. Second one.
Okay, but okay. But perhaps they saw Abai as another opportunist seeking money or as a sectarian religionist. But Abai saw himself as a lowly servant of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Seeing certain Vaishnava qualities in the character of Mahatma Gandhi, Abai took the opportunity to introduce the spiritual master's message to the world. And by so doing, he paid tribute to Mahatma Gandhi, praising him as a great devotee interested in kirtan, temple worship, and elevating unfortunates to become people of God. Of course, as you may have expected, they did not respond favorably. Definitely, they did not respond favorably. But the interesting thing is that Prabhupada is not really concerned so much about the outcome as in the genuine. This is a genuine solution. Prabhupada knows it is a genuine solution and he's presenting it in a very genuine manner. The genuine solution in a genuine manner, Prabhupada tried to present it and still it did not work, but he was not disappointed because of that. He still continued to do the right things. Okay, so that was what is happening on his letter writing front. Because initially he started publishing Back to Garden magazines. And then because Back to Garden stopped, then he continued his preaching through letters. Then not only was he externally, he was sending out letters, but internally he was writing on his working on his manuscript of the Bhagavad-Gita, which we had touched upon in the previous class. So he was writing a 1,200 page book manuscript, which with royal binding and top class printing. So he was working on that book privately. He was working on that book at home. He was getting that manuscript ready for printing. So he tried to get that done at this time. Okay. It's a very, very interesting episode. I mean, a very mystical episode. Mysterious, rather. While on business in Madurai, in South India, Abai showed some of his writings to Muthuswami Chetty, another medical salesman. Mr. Chetty was impressed and felt he could persuade his wealthy friend, Dr. Alagappa, the famous Birla of the South, to finance the printing. In April of 1948, Mr. Chetty wrote to Abai saying that he had been prompted to help Abai for something God has meant. He asked Abai Charan to send him the complete Gita-Upanishad manuscript so that he could present it to Dr. Alagappa in Madras. Mr. Chetty had already written Dr. Alagappa about the first-class work Gita-Upanishad to cover 1,200 pages of royal size and had urged him to publish it for the benefit of religious-minded people. He had also mentioned that Abai had been trying to publish the book since 1946. Dr. Alagappa soon replied to Mr. Chetty that he was interested, and Mr. Chetty wrote to Abai, "So I am on my way to help you, and only God must help me. As for talking business with Dr. Alagappa, there will be no need, since once he does it, it is for the sake of benevolence." So he was willing to print it for free. Anticipating success, Mr. Chetty invited Abai to come to Madras to meet Dr. Alagappa. There he will arrange for what God has meant for you to do in your religious duty. In Madras, Abai would be able to check and correct the proofs of the manuscript and see the book through the various stages of printing. It was a big opportunity, and Abai was not one to miss an opportunity. If the book could be published, it would be a great victory in his mission to fulfill the request of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But then the worst thing happened. The manuscript was stolen. It was the only copy, the one Abai was keeping safely at home. He questioned his family and servants. No one knew what had happened. Abai was baffled. So much work had been undone. He felt he had worked so many months for nothing. Although he couldn't prove anything, he suspected that his servant or even his son might have done it with a motive for raising money. But it remained a mystery. So first of all, he started writing writing letters to prominent people, or as and when the opportunity arose. Then he was trying to get the Gita-Upanishad published. That also collapsed. So what else remains? What else could he do more than these two things? So he started writing for the Gaudiya Patrika, which was a publication by his godbrother, Bhakti Pragyana Keshava Maharaj. Okay, let's read that a bit. During 1949, Abai wrote articles in Bengali and submitted them to his godbrother, B.P. Keshav Maharaj, who published them in his Gaudiya Patrika. Abai's format for addressing world problems was the same as spiritual masters. Even at their first meeting in 1922, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had countered Abai's nationalistic arguments by stressing that the real crisis in the world was neither social nor political nor anything material, but simply the dearth of transcendental knowledge. Abai simply elaborated on this theme. He never advocated that the ordinary concerns of the world be disregarded, but he stressed that crisis can be solved only when the leadership is God conscious. Now, this is the thrust, the crux of Prabhupada's teaching, both during those days and how we established ISKCON. He never advocated that the ordinary concerns of the world would be disregarded. He had in the Back to God, in fact, if you notice, probably during Prabhupada, later also, there used to be a column called Vedic Observer. Today, sometimes it is there, but sometimes I've not seen in some issues. Vedic Observer is their commentary on the issues of the day. So Prabhupada, it's mentioned, Satsuma is mentioning, he never advocated that the ordinary concerns of the world be disregarded, but he stressed that the crisis cannot be solved only when the leadership is God conscious. If Krishna consciousness were put first, other concerns could be brought into line. But without Krishna consciousness, so-called situations were only folly. Notice what he does. Abai began his first Bengali article by quoting an editorial from the Allahabad edition of the Calcutta newspaper. Now, some newspapers are based in Calcutta, some are based in, like today, some are based in Delhi, some are based in South India, like that. So this Amrit Bazaar Patrika was based in Calcutta and they had an Allahabad edition. The editor had sorely lamented that India's worst troubles had not yet ended despite national independence. Because generally we have this idea, if we get this freedom, whatever freedom we may be hankering for, then we can do this. But Prabhupada's point was that every freedom is a kind of bondage. It will create some kind of bondage also. There's nothing called freedom. Freedom comes with the package of bondage. Because this is a world of duality. Nothing comes in by its own. It comes with its dual counterpart. So, the editor of Untitled Bazaar Patrika had written, the National Week has begun. The memories of Jallianwala Bagh and political serfdom no longer trouble us. What is memories of Jallianwala Bagh? Jallianwala Bagh was a peaceful protest which Gandhi's followers had organized, and the British came and mercilessly they shot hundreds and thousands of people dead. So memories of Jallianwala Bagh and political serfdom no longer trouble us. But our trouble is far from being at an end. In the dispensation of providence, mankind cannot have any rest. I mean, Prabhupada is very fond of this expression. In the dispensation of providence, mankind cannot have any rest. Although this is used by the Untitled Bazaar Patrika editor. If one kind of trouble goes, another quickly follows. India, politically free, is faced with difficulties no less serious than those that troubled us under a foreign rule. Abai seized on this editorial reflection as proof of the basic defect of all worldly plans for amelioration. He pointed out that although India had been subjugated by foreign rulers since the time of Muhammad Ghori, AD 1050, India prior to that had never been subjugated. In those days, India had been a God-conscious nation. It was only when India's leaders had abandoned their spiritual heritage that India had fallen. Thus, Indians should see that they are now being punished by the stringent laws of material nature. The honorable editor of Amrit Bazar Patrika, Abai noted, has written so sadly, if one trouble goes, another quickly follows. But that was stated in the Bhagavad-Gita a long time previously. It was the same theme he had also stated in his 1944 Back to God articles, and the theme of so many of his letters also. Man, due to his neglect of the Supreme Lord, is being punished by material nature, which is directly controlled by the Supreme Lord. Men may write newspaper articles, pass measures at meetings and conferences, and attempt to overcome nature by scientific research. Yet they will remain unable to surmount nature's law. As they try to escape their punishments, the Supreme Lord will cast them deeper into illusion. The more they try to escape, the more they get entangled. As I gave the example of the spider's web, if an insect gets trapped in a spider's web, the more it struggles, the more it gets entangled. So, the greater they try to escape their punishments, the Supreme Lord will cast them deeper into illusion, which means material nature will trap their living entity further and further, and they will fail miserably. Abai quoted an appropriate Bengali saying, I was trying to make a statue of Shiva, but I ended up making a monkey. In order to rid the world of misery and bring about happiness, we have now created the atomic bomb, seeing the all-pervading destruction which could take place in the near future by atomic reactions. Western thinkers have become greatly disturbed. Some people try to give consolation, saying that we will only use this atomic energy to bring about happiness in the world. This is also another enigma of the illusory potency, because the so-called peaceful use doesn't exist. I mean, apparent superficial exists, but it'll go to be another problem. Radioactive contaminations, a lot of things are there with atomic peacetime use. The problem Abai explained was that the world was lacking Krishna-conscious devotees. Leaders under the influence of material nature could never solve the problems of the world. Materialistic illusion was especially prevalent in the Western countries, which Indians should not try to imitate. Abai prophesied, however, that Krishna consciousness would one day reach the West. In the Western countries, there has never been any discussion of the relation between the atomic individual soul and the supreme, complete conscious personality of Godhead. This is proper writing. Neither their activities nor their state in ultimate perfection has been investigated. That is why, even though they have made so much material advancement, they are squirming in the burning poison of sensualism. We can be absolutely certain that India's real peace formula will one day reach their ears. Look at what Prabhu is saying. Look at the expression that he uses. That materialistic life means to squirm in the burning poison of sensualism. Abhai's articles began appearing regularly in the Gaudiya Patrika. His godbrothers appreciated his writings. His denunciation of the materialistic mentality was reminiscent of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's. In Abhai's hands, the Bhagavad-Gita concept of the Asura, demon, was no longer merely a depiction of a mythological or legendary enemy. The Asuras had come to life in the modern day Hitler, Churchill, or even an Indian Prime Minister. But as Abhai pointed out, his denunciation of the misleaders was not his own. He was only repeating the words of Krishna. Look at, Prabhupada's spirit tirelessly preaching the message of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Now, this is 1949 when he started writing for Gaudiya Patrika. Then in the years 1950 and 51, Prabhupada continued to write letters. His writing spree did not stop. He wrote to an American reporter. He wrote to the Ford Foundation. He also wrote to the governor of Uttar Pradesh. He did a lot of things, actually. He did a lot of things. But all of them would give the same kind of response. Either they are not interested. There was one Bailey, American reporter. And I think his name was Bailey. Yeah. So, and then he was not interested in the message that Prabhupada had to say. He wrote to the Ford Foundation, and the Ford Foundation said that unfortunately we don't have a program like what you want, like Prabhupada wanted. Basically, Prabhupada was also asking for some institutional funding, because Prabhupada has not just had a philosophy, but he knew how to transform people. That's by giving classes on Bhagavad-Gita, having temples or facilities for people to live, doing deity worship and activities of bhakti. So he had practical plans, and he would try to enunciate his plans to these various people. He even wrote to the governor of Uttar Pradesh. And so, but however, he did not get a favorable response from any of them. Okay, so we have one concluding section for today's class, how Prabhupada achieved the special mercy of the Lord. It's a very, very interesting section. With that, we'll end. But before that, I just need to just drink a little bit of water. Just give me a minute. So here, Satsuru Maharaj starts with 1948 itself, because he was saying, because this Prabhupada's business winding down happened not instantly, it happened over a period of time. So we have captured until 1951 what is happening. From 1946, he closed the Back to God magazine. Then we saw what he was doing after that, writing. So we saw the partition of India and we came all the way till 1951. So now we're going to retrace back to 1948 and see what is happening in Prabhupada's life. In his business life. In 1940 and spiritual life, of course. In 1948, Abai closed his Lucknow factory. He had fallen behind in his employee salaries, and since 1946, he had been paying past rent in installments. But when sales dropped off, continuing the factory became impossible. He lost everything. Srila Prabhupada, I started a big laboratory in Lucknow. Those were golden days. My business flourished like anything. Everyone in the chemical business knew, but then gradually everything dwindled. With the help of some acquaintances in Allahabad, he opened a small factory there in the same city where his Prayag pharmacy had failed 15 years before. He moved to Allahabad with his son Vrindavan and continued manufacturing medicines, while the rest of the family remained at Banerjee Lane, 6 Sita Kanta Banerjee Lane in Calcutta. Abai continued his traveling, but now he was often away for months at a time. And then he had the dream a second time, that same dream. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati appeared before him. Again, he was beckoning, indicating that Abai should take sannyas. And again, Abai had to put the dream aside. He was a householder with many responsibilities. To take sannyas would mean to give up everything. He had to earn money. He now had 5 children. Why is Guru Maharaj asking me to take sannyas, he thought. It was not possible now. So the Lucknow business collapsed, Bombay collapsed. Originally, Prayag pharmacy collapsed, and Bombay collapsed, and Lucknow is collapsing now. Then after Lucknow collapsed, then he opened Allahabad again. The Allahabad business was unsuccessful. At present, the condition of our business is not very good. He wrote his servant Gauranga, who had asked to rejoin him. When the condition gets better, and if you are free at that time, I will call for you. He worked earnestly, but results were meager. As with everything else, Abai saw his present circumstances through the eyes of scripture, and he could not help but think of the verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Yasyaham anugranami harishye tad dhanam shanai tato dhanam tyajanti asya swajana dukkha dukkitam. When I feel especially merciful towards someone, I gradually take away all of his material possessions, his friends and relatives, then reject this poverty-stricken and most wretched fellow. He had heard Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati quote the verse, and now he thought of it often. He took it that his present circumstances were controlled by Lord Krishna, who was forcing him into a helpless position, freeing him for preaching Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada, somehow or other, my intention for preaching the message of Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu increased and the other side decreased. I was not disinclined, but Krishna forced me. You must give it up. The history is known, how it decreased. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Queen Kunti also prayed, my dear Lord Krishna, your lordship can easily be approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted. One who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and bodily beauty, cannot approach you with sincere feeling. Srila Prabhupada. So in 1950, I retired, practically. Not retired, but a little in touch with business, whatever is going on. Then almost it became nil. Whatever was there, all right. You do whatever you like. Abai's wife independently moved along with her sons back to her father's house at 72 Mahatma Gandhi Road. She had reasoned that her financial support was becoming precarious. Abai was spending most of his time away from home. He was gradually dissociating himself from the family. When after several months he would meet his wife and children, his father-in-law would criticize him. You're always going outside. You're always worshipping God. You're not looking after my family. Whenever he could, Abai would send his family some money. Now, this is a recollection from Mr. Sudhir Kumar Datta, who is Prabhupada's nephew, sister's son. I sometimes noticed how he was thinking. I don't know if it's sister's son or his brother's, Krishna's Charan's son. Anyway, I sometimes noticed how he was thinking so many things about his family, about his writings, about making bigger and bigger in business, what to do. He was thinking seriously to earn more money from his business. But that means he has to give more time for his business. And his writing, he would never give up. He was writing more and more. And people sometimes abused him. Hey, you're writing religious things. You're only thinking of God. Then who will maintain your family? What will you do for the family? Sometimes he argued with them. What has this family given me? Why should I forget about God? This is the real thing, what I am doing. You cannot realize what I'm doing. On a visit to Calcutta, Abhay stayed at the home of his father-in-law, where he was given his own room. When his wife served him dinner, he noticed that everything had been purchased from the market. How is this? He asked. The cook is sick today, Radharani replied. Abhay thought, it is better that we not live here at the home of her father, or else she will be spoiled even more. So he moved his family to a new address on Chetla Street. Here he sometimes stayed with his family for a few months, writing articles and doing a minimal amount of business. But most of the time he stayed in Allahabad. In Allahabad, Abhay, now 54, lived like a Vanaprastha, or one who has retired from family life. He was indifferent to the activities of family and business, activities a family man generally considers as prime objects of responsibility and happiness. In his writings, Abhay had several times discussed the 4 ashrams, or spiritual divisions of Vedic society: Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. In the first division, the Brahmacharya ashram, a young boy's parents send him to the place of the Guru or Gurukula, where he lives a simple life, studying the Vedic literature under the guidance of his Guru. Thus, in his childhood and youth, he learns the principles of austerity and spiritual knowledge that form the basis for his entire life. At age 21, the Brahmachari may take a wife and thus enter the next ashram, the Grihastha ashram. Or like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he may choose to remain a lifelong Brahmachari. In his boyhood, Abhay had remained celibate and had imbibed the principles of devotion to Krishna from his father and mother. Although he had lived at home, his upbringing had been the equivalent of Brahmachari life. And by marriage at the age of 21, he had entered the Grihastha ashram at the appropriate age. Gaur Mohan's example had shown Abhay how to remain a devotee of Krishna even in family life. And as Vaishnavas, Abhay and his wife had avoided the excesses of materialistic household life. At 50, a man is supposed to retire from his family activities, and this stage is called Vanaprastha. In the Vanaprastha ashram, both man and wife agreed to abstain from further sexual contact. They may continue living together, but the emphasis is on spiritual partnership. As Vanaprasthas, they may travel together on pilgrimage to the holy places in India, preparing for their inevitable departure from the material world. Thus, the Vedic ashramas, after allowing one to fulfill material life, enable one to end the cycle of repeated birth and death and attain this eternal spiritual world. A man of 50 should be able to see by his aging body that inevitable death is approaching, and he should have the good sense to prepare. In the final division, the Sannyasa Ashram, the man places his wife in the care of a grown son and fully dedicates himself to serving the Supreme Lord. Formerly, the Sannyasa Ashram meant a solitary life of penances in the Himalayas. But in the Gaudiya Vaishnava line, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had emphasized preaching. Although Abhay had not formally defined his status within the 4 ashramas, he appeared to be living more as a Vanaprastha than a Grihastha. He saw his business failures and his distasteful family situation as Krishna's blessings, freeing him from family responsibilities and turning him wholeheartedly towards executing Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's order to preach. Okay, we are at 4:57. Okay, so that's a good time to stop. Any questions? One of the reasons that I'm reading out these things a little extensively is to create that continuity. The Prabhupada after 1965, there's no difference between that Prabhupada and Prabhupada who lived in his family life trying to preach the message of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. That's why, I mean, I'm getting into this much detail because, of course, it's Prabhupada's pastime, so everything is nectarian. But to establish that clear and strong connectivity, there is only one Prabhupada. It's not that Prabhupada was of one kind before, later he changed, he adapted. Yeah, he accommodated, I would say. He accommodated everyone in Krishna consciousness. He was intelligent. He had to accommodate everyone. But his presentation was consistent throughout his life. There's a question in the chat, or
Not here.
any questions? Yes, Bhavji. Can you unmute her? Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes, Bhavji.
I have slightly out of the context of today's discussion. Just reading Srimad Bhagavatam, the Canto 2, I have one doubt, Prabhuji. So in this, Prabhupada has mentioned in the text 36, Canto 2, Chapter 6, Prabhupada has mentioned, I just read out these two lines, Prabhuji. Can you, please enlighten, how can this be understood? Prabhupada is mentioning one scientific man who had no belief in God was very much enthusiastic in making plans for his material existence and therefore opened a hospital to save the living. But after opening the hospital, he himself died within 6 months. So one should not spoil his human life, which is obtained after many, many changes of bodies in 84 lakh species of life, simply for concocted material happiness of life through increasing artificial needs in the name of advancement of economic development and scientific knowledge. Rather, one should simply surrender unto the feet of the Lord to make a solution to all miseries of life. Right. This is, Sri Prabhupada is talking about, I don't know, it's definitely not against the economic development. We should, how do we understand? We should both balance the current social development and also being in the conscious Krishna consciousness, right? Because that the technology, whatever that we are using, definitely, because I hear that once Prabhupada himself has told, Prabhupada, you are against technology, but you are flying the airplane. But Prabhupada said, yes, if this airplane is used for spreading Krishna consciousness, then it makes sense. So
okay. I mean, well, it is in one sense, your question is not unrelated to the class, because the whole theme of presentation today, I mean, that we read, Prabhupada is consistently speaking about leaders should not be ignorant of what material nature is. So every advancement comes with degradation also. Because this is a world of duality. So when you say material advancement, it also goes with material degradation. You cannot avoid it. There are two sides of the same coin. It's like how our Sridhar Maharaj, ISKCON Sridhar Maharaj used to say, you can't lift one end of a stick. The moment you lift one end of a stick, you're obviously automatically lifting the other end of the stick. So it's like that. So Prabhupada once, regarding the aeroplanes, since you mentioned, Prabhupada once mentioned, yes, we have nice facility to travel from one place to another fast, but at the same time, the aeroplane can kill 300 people at one shot, so if it crashes, right? So on the other hand, not just that, you also have environmental pollution and all that. So it comes at a very big cost. So the greater the advancement, the greater is the cost. Cost means not just financially, but also it costs in terms of our living. It's going to complicate our life further. You know, it's not like, the simple thing is this, okay, that why, when we were in school, we would hear this thing, right? It's like, what is the purpose of all material advancement? His purpose of all material advancement was supposed to be to make our life simple. It's a fact. That is why they wanted to make advancement. Okay, plowing the field is so difficult, get the tractors. Everything for that matter was meant to make our life simpler. But no one can say that advancement of material civilization has made anyone's life simpler. It has made it very complicated. Because this clearly shows it has defeated the very purpose for which it is being done. So the more we advance, the more life gets complicated. Today, we may think, oh, it's wonderful to communicate through WhatsApp, through so many different methods of communication. But it's also made life difficult. It's not that if you want to sit for a few hours and read Prabhupada's books, so there'll be so many disturbances, some WhatsApp message, this, I mean, all kinds of things. People are able to much more easily reach you than before, right? So everything has its own advantages and disadvantages. Anything done with the idea of material or mental body, when you say body comfort, it does not mean just gross body. Any advancement of material nature which is done with that purpose to increase the bodily comforts or to increase the mind's comforts or subtle body's comforts is definitely going to come with an adverse reaction. So Prabhupada says that what is the prescribed method of avoiding adverse reaction? Just live by whatever God has provided. Just raise some, God has provided nature. So God has also provided cows and all these things. So he says that is not called adva. I mean, you're not trying to make material nature better than what it already is, right? So you're only trying to use whatever the Lord has provided in to live a life which can focus on God. That's the basic idea. The very concept that there is economic development, the word development is a false, it's a false term. There's nothing called development. It is all deterioration because, they don't use the word deterioration. They use the word development. But development has an equal component of deterioration, right? So some people may choose to call it development, but Prabhupada calls it deterioration because overall it's deteriorating your life. It is not, it's supposed to make it better. Deterioration means your focus, time and focus, energy that you can spend in Krishna consciousness is going to get reduced. It's not going to get increased. That's why he wanted us to get out of the loop of modern life and get into Varnashrama. It may not be possible for several of us. That's a different thing. So if it's not possible, let's just do whatever best we can. But does not mean that that does not mean that we cannot perform Varnashram. So therefore, we cannot live in a farm. Therefore, Krishna consciousness is very discouraging. No, whatever condition of life we are in, somehow they practice Krishna consciousness. But those who are able to establish the vision of a farm, they can do much more good to the humanity than what we can do, because it will help a lot of people to become Krishna conscious. Because that's why Prabhupada wanted Varnashram, because it will help a lot of people to be stable in material life and practice Krishna consciousness in a very stable manner, without the uncertainties and of modern life. For example, one pandemic has set the whole world into chaos. That kind of thing cannot happen when one is living in an agrarian economy, on farms.
Yeah, Prabhuji. Thanks. It's quite a debatable thing, Prabhuji, because we have, as you said, like it has both good and bad as technology advanced, because we should say because of these technology, actually, we as lots of people and got connected. Inside ISKCON itself, because previously a lot of people even doesn't know, because of these Zoom classes and these technologies that we're using, we could able to connect much better. but also there is a side effects, as you say. But as long as we identify and identify those whatever the worst conditions, ignore and take the good, that makes sense.
No, I get your point, but the point, if you look at it, see, it's not that Prabhupada said there are airplanes and the books could go across the whole world and all that, correct? There are so many things which are there during Prabhupada's time. Yet, he unequivocally criticized modern civilization. There's no doubt in that. I mean, he took advantage of whatever. Prabhupada said there's another foolishness, that we are living here. Whatever exists, let us use it, But it does not mean that we are dependent on it, right? I mean, like, let's suppose that, like Prabhupada said, I mean, there are some anecdotes where Prabhupada said the whole world will collapse with a third world war, or oil crisis, or whatever. And then what happens? Then everybody will go back to the farm. So Prabhupada has been anticipating things like that would happen, right? So it is not that Prabhupada, despite the fact that he was traveling in airplanes and whatever, he was not thinking, let the status quo continue. He's not thinking like that. He thinks this is wrong. The civilization is wrong. He's consistently saying it. Okay, till the time it exists, let us use it for our preaching purposes. Fine.
Yeah. Absolutely, Prabhuji. 20 years before, life was much better than today. Definitely. Though we didn't have anything, but life was so peaceful.
Correct. Yes.
We have so many things, but life is not peaceful. And one more, it's not out of context, Prabhuji. I just need your guidance. Is there any book, because I was just searching for Goswami's books, actually. So I saw that there's a book by Stephen Roston and O.B.L. Kapoor, but I don't know which is the authenticated one, Prabhuji. Can you suggest?
No,
like
Goswamis means you're talking about 6 Goswamis.
Yeah, I saw that 6 Goswamis book by Stephen Roston. Is that the authenticated one?
Yeah, that's Satyaraj Prabhu. That's fine. You can read that.
Okay, there's one with O.B.L. Kapoor. What about that, Prabhuji? But that is not 6 Goswamis, but it also includes Loknath Goswami Maharaj.
I mean, that's a little bit, Prabhupada had mixed things to say. So you can read Satyaraj Prabhu's book, that would be fine. I mean, anyway, that itself is, there's quite a lot of material in that.
Okay, Prabhuji, what did you say? Satyaraj Prabhu?
That's Stephen Rosen. Stephen Rosen is Satyaraj Prabhu. Stephen Rosen is Satyaraj Prabhu.
Okay.
It's proper disciple, Satyaraj.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare. Okay, then Sailesh Govinda Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandava Pranam, Prabhupada. Wonderful class. Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Firstly, you made a comment earlier in the class that scripture for us means Prabhupada's books. I presume scripture for us means all of our Guru Parampara's books and commentaries, not just restricted to Prabhupada's books.
Okay, well,
scripture to us should mean any authorized commentator that comes in our Parampara line, not just restricted to Prabhupada's books.
No, I got your question. I got your point. But there is a reason why I said specifically for us means Prabhupada's books, because what is it? In hermeneutics or in philosophy, you have an expression called Nirnetavya and Nirnayaka. Nirnayatavya means that which is referenced, and then Nirnayaka means that which decides. Okay, so when I said for us scripture means Prabhupada's books, it means because Prabhupada's books are teaching us how you apply the teaching of the previous acharyas and the Vedas. Therefore, for us, scripture means Prabhupada's books. That is what gives us the decision how to practice Krishna consciousness. We may not be able to understand how to practice Krishna consciousness exactly by reading the previous acharya's books. So in that sense, I was referring to scripture for us means Prabhupada's books, because it is not, I mean, sometimes devotees, they try to read the previous acharya's book and try to see how Prabhupada is explaining the previous acharyas. But instead of that, the other method is you take Prabhupada's teachings and look at all the previous acharyas' teachings through the teachings of Prabhupada. So that's a method that members of ISKCON have to follow, because he is he's the deciding authority for us, right? So in every tradition, it's like that. For example, in the Madhva tradition, we are also Madhvas. So they take Madhva as the deciding authority. So even if Ramanuja says something or whatever, they will say, what is Madhva saying? What is our Acharya saying? So the writings of their Acharyas form their scripture, so to speak. All the scripture in general, yes, it is a vast term. But for us specifically, I said Prabhupada's books because that is what decides for us. We are not capable of directly looking at scripture and deciding anything. I mean, the decisions are all given by Prabhupada's books. In that sense, I was saying scripture. They are not all equal. They are not, the writings of the previous acharyas and Prabhupada are not equal for us. It's not equal.
But we can still take guidance from that now, because it is parampara. I mean, we can't say that what something that Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, anyone that may have made commentary on Bhagavatam, that we shouldn't read and we should only read Prabhupada's books, because that is in line with parampara.
That's fine. You can read it as long as your understanding of what they're saying is in line with what Prabhupada is saying.
Sorry, I'm not saying in contention with Prabhupada. I'm saying alongside with Prabhupada's commentary. Like for instance, beyond sort of on Canto 10, beyond chapter I can't remember 18, 20, Prabhupada's commentaries are not there. It is obviously Prabhupada's disciples, where it would be useful to see what our previous acharyas have said in these. And particularly 10th canto onwards, because Prabhupada's direct sort of comments aren't there present.
Yeah. No, like for example, let's say that in some place, Bhagavatam is fairly simple, but if you look at Bhagavad-Gita, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur follows an entirely different line of presentation. I mean, it's his own stream of presentation. Then Baladev Vidyabhushan's own stream of presentation. Prabhupada's own stream of presentation. It's all unique. You can't look at Prabhupada and say, I mean, generally Prabhupada, to a large extent, the first 6 chapters I'm talking about. To a great extent, Prabhupada follows Ramanujacharya, but in those first 6 chapters. But nevertheless, the point is that Prabhupada still, not fully, there are significant, he draws significantly from Ramanujacharya. But at the same time, it's not only Ramanujacharya. It's unique. So my point is, if we look at Prabhupada's Gita and try to see how Baladev Vidyabhushan's Gita is explaining Prabhupada's teaching, you cannot. It's just a totally different line of presentation. Similarly, all valid. All of them are valid. Similarly, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's Gita it's all unique presentation. And Prabhupada is also a very unique presentation of Gita. So unique does not mean speculative. I mean to say that it's all purely authoritative. But you can't. The 3 are parallel. There's no. Of course, very rarely there could be some, not rarely, there could be some intersecting areas, but it's a certain method of presentation. That's it. Like, for example, Baladev Vidyabhushan speaks about, Swarishta, the devotees. He talks about 3 types of devotees. Prabhupada doesn't refer to that term at all, And then, like, there are different ways of presenting things. So, sometimes when we read the previous acharyas, because, for example, why I say this is because I've seen one Bhagavad-Gita study book. Okay, I don't want to name the book. You may have come across it. It's quite well known. It's Bhagavad-Gita study guide. In that study guide, you have an expression called Sakama Karma Yoga. Now, Sakama Karma Yoga is not used by any of our acharyas. It's just not used by any of our acharyas. It's a purely concocted term. It comes because somehow or the other, the author tried to, weave everything together with Prabhupada and all that. It becomes very, very complicated because Baladev Vidyabhushan is separate. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is separate. As far as Gita is concerned. Bhagavatam, yes, Prabhupada is largely drawn from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Sridhar Swami. It's much more simpler to see how Prabhupada is presenting the Bhagavatam. But when it comes to Gita, it's very tough. Yeah, that's what I meant. Like in the sense that the point is, that we can, read the previous Acharya's works. Prabhupada himself did not have a problem with that, provided we try to understand those works through Prabhupada's own writings. For example, in ISKCON, we have this endless, never-ending, complicated discussion about where did the jivas fall from, So some people claim that Jiva Goswami says this. So that's why it's important for us to just stick with what Prabhupada is saying. Prabhupada, whatever he's saying in his books is what he's saying. We don't have to somehow that say that, okay, this is what Jiva Goswami is saying. Prabhupada may have said this because a Western audience cannot handle it. There are various theories which are being posed, but anyway, you got the point, right? That Prabhupada's books are what decides for us.
Yes, thank you, Prabhuji. That was, my question was not to be in contention with Prabhupada's books, but to complement our understanding, to get a deeper understanding. Surely it must be sort of okay to read a previous Acharya's commentary, particularly on Bhagavatam, because there's so much nectar in Bhagavatam.
Yes.
Okay. Second question. Again, apologies if it's not meant to sound confrontational. Unfortunately, my nature. I enjoy questions. We learn from Prabhupada's own teachings that in Sannyasa Ashram, our primary responsibility is to deliver, it's said in scripture, one mustn't become guru unless you can deliver your disciple, one mustn't become a husband unless you can deliver your wife, one mustn't become a father unless you can deliver your child. In that line, Sannyasa Ashram means that we have to take family life seriously in terms of focusing the family in developing Krishna consciousness within that. Now, of course, we understand the bigger picture. In Prabhupada's life, there was a bigger picture and a bigger game that Krishna had plans for Prabhupada. But there is a contrary teaching here that one outsiders may argue. And my always purpose of asking these questions is to build up armory so that we've got, between us, if we've talked these things out, then you've got clear thoughts as to how one can present these arguments rather than just giving esoteric or because it was Krishna's will. It is fine to say that, but people don't necessarily always buy that unless we can give a sort of a logical argument to some things. So in Prabhupada's life, of course, his family were not essentially Krishna consciousness, and we can understand this is by Krishna's arrangements so that Prabhupada could be pushed into his next stage of spiritual life for the rest of the world's benefit. But how do we understand that contradiction in that he was not able to develop his family's Krishna consciousness, or sort of was able to commit the time required to do so because he was outside preaching externally? And this is a fault of many ISKCON preachers sometimes, that senior devotees also criticize us on, that it is important that we have to provide enough time, if you've taken into Sannyasa Ashram, that there must be enough commitment and time given to developing the family and children's Krishna consciousness. If all you do is preach and don't deliver that, then you've failed in your Sannyasa Ashram responsibilities and dharma. So I'm just trying to grapple with this in my head so that we've got some strength in argument as how we can present that. So apologies, there's a lot there.
This is an excellent point. Yes, Prabhupada's teaching is that we should give attention to our family, and because they are our immediate people whom we are supposed to deliver, right? And Prabhupada even wrote a letter to Pradyumna Prabhu's wife, Arundhati. She said, for you, child worship is more important than deity worship. So Prabhupada is very emphatic about delivering family members and giving time to them in Krishna consciousness. If we notice what happened with Prabhupada's life, it is quite evident that Prabhupada did his best. He tried to have programs at his house, but his wife was not willing to participate. And similarly with the children, because children were just just carried away by what the mother was doing or what the mother was saying. So Prabhupada made genuine efforts to engage his family in Krishna consciousness. But ultimately, as they say, you can only take a horse to the water, you can't make it drink. What to speak of Prabhupada? Even Advaitacharyas, all of his children did not become devotees. What do? You can't really help it, because ultimately it's a free will of the jiva. So Prabhupada, if you notice, last class also you were there, Prabhupada is consistently trying to engage his family members, but somehow or the other, they are not interested in, like, for example, even when he wanted a servant to be sent to Lucknow for improving his business, the family refused, saying that some household, some work, I mean, this is for improving financially his business. So even that they were not very cooperative. So the point is, did Prabhupada try? Yes, we can see them trying, right? But there, she's not willing to, family was not willing to go along with it or participate in it.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Who's the Acintya Krishna Das? That's not my name. Okay. My name is Acintya Caitanya Das. Okay. I thought that someone called Acintya Krishna Das was using it before. Okay. So if there are no comments, any further questions or comments, we can. Stylish Gandhi, you have anything more to say? Your hand is still up. Unmute.
No, Prabhu, that's fine. It's fine for today. I'll save more for next time. It's unfair if I hog so much time and space.
We have some time, actually. We still have some time. We can ask one question.
Well, my continuing question was this was. I don't think we've covered it properly. I think I think there's more guidance required for grihastas in terms of balance and time balance between developing Grihastha Ashram and Krishna consciousness. Yeah, obviously it's one and the same, of course. You've got to have Krishna consciousness at home. But I think there is this imbalance sometimes within ISKCON preaching community, where that imbalance throws the Grihastha responsibility out from the preaching responsibility. If you can't develop Krishna consciousness at home, then it seems foolhardy to be, going out and preaching if one can't do, sort of what is required at home with your primary responsibility as Grihastha. So there is an area of education, I think, that needs to be more light thrown upon for the ashram, particularly the Grihastha Ashram. I think that's my personal opinion. So apologies if I'm.
No, that's correct. That's correct. See, I've encountered this kind of question, and also situations like this. No, it's not just. That's why I said it's an excellent question. So, my take on this is that we can't do it just by education, because you can't teach. You can't really teach this in a. You can only give some basic guiding principles, but the real teaching can be done by those grihasthas who are doing it right. If they can act as mentors, then the other grihasthas will also be able to do it well. Of course, we can have some guiding principles, but ultimately you need to have people who are applying it properly and doing it well. Then they'll be able to inspire other people to also do the same thing. Otherwise, it's a problem. I mean, it'll always be it's kind of it'll be, it's going to be vague and unclear and things like that. Sannyasis obviously cannot instruct, because unless they've gone through Grihastha life themselves. But if they're Naishtika Brahmacharis who became sannyasis, then definitely they cannot advise on family life for sure. So who else? Brahmacharis cannot. So it can only be experienced grihastha who has done it right, or
It's
You
a,
may
it's a
not have done it.
cultural issue more than an education issue, isn't it? It goes beyond the philosophy. It goes to the root of culture.
No, I would say it depends on how you understand and apply the philosophy. That's there, actually. You need some hand-holding sometimes, because while practicing, we may not know exactly how to apply. Then who is it who's going to guide us to apply properly? There has to be someone who's done it right, or has got some experience in what works, what does not work. It's not just cultural, but just how do you apply it? Somebody who's got some realization and experience.
Thank you, Prabhu. I'm done for today. Thank you.
Asha. Okay, so we'll stop here today. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha paritanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo.